Make no mistake, God has a purpose for you. God calls you. Or your smartphone might not ring in the next few minutes during the sermon. If it does, maybe you should be preaching next week. Or there might not be flashes of lightning or a thunderous voice coming down. But for those who have dared to follow in the Judeo-Christian tradition for thousands of years, we have proclaimed that God calls you. God has a purpose. This past Thursday at Bible study, one of our members, Margie Schwartz, summarized what that purpose is, quoting Jesus, saying the purpose for a Christian is to love God with all heart, strength, mind, body, and soul, and to love neighbors. Now, I like that there are Bible stories, call stories, that help elaborate on what that overarching mission is that God calls us to. And today we have two call stories. The call of a young boy, Samuel, and the call of a young man, Nathaniel. And from the call of Samuel, we learn the importance of standing up and speaking out when injustice happens. And from the call of Nathaniel, it's revealed how important action is if we are to take the light of Jesus into the world around us. So let's look first at the young boy Samuel. The story tells us that he was ministering in the house of the Lord and that he was being mentored by someone, an older priest named Eli. Now the call to Samuel didn't go through on the first try. In fact, it didn't go through on the second and third try. Not because there was a bad cell phone tower, but because Samuel needed help in discerning what the call and what the voice of God is like. And so Eli, the priest, helps him and discerns what's happening and says, when you hear the voice again, say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." He helps introduce Samuel to what the call is all about. And I think of Eli, the older priest, and I think of our team of Elis who at this very moment are teaching our Sunday school students and leading Bible studies throughout the week, and how grateful we are for the Elis in our life. And Samuel was called by God to become a prophet and a priest, and he ministered, and he grew up, and as a young man, he became the one to inaugurate or anoint the line of kings for the Jews. The very first king, Saul, is the one he anoints. And then following Saul is David, and then following David, Solomon. And so Samuel was called to an important task in his life by God. But in this reading this morning, Samuel was called not to anoint a king, but called to bring bad news to Eli. Words of judgment, words of condemnation from God for Eli's family. Now, we don't have the details of what those actions were that God was judging, but if we read earlier in 1 Samuel, we would learn that Eli, as a priest, was involved in the sacrifice at the temple, and his sons helped him with that process, and they would receive animals for sacrifice. And at one point, the sons of Eli were saying to those bringing their sacrifices, "We don't want any boiled meat. We want raw meat. Don't boil the fat off. We want it all. We want the raw meat for our sacrifices." And if you don't bring it, they threatened the people with violence, the text tells us. And that's what God rejects. God rejects religion that threatens innocence with violence. Isn't it interesting that our reading this morning would connect to a God that rejects violence in the name of religion against the innocent? I find it almost fascinating because we certainly are aware of groups like Boko Haram or the violent extremists responsible for the attack in Paris. And people of faith all over the world have condemned acts like that, realizing the importance of standing up and speaking out against such atrocities. Did you see the images of the world leaders gathered 1 week ago, arm in arm, walking silently in the streets of Paris, What a powerful witness as millions came out, many of them holding signs in French saying, Je suis Charlie, I am Charlie. Expressing solidarity with those around the globe who believe in freedom of expression and freedom of speech and condemnation of acts of terror. In the middle of this week, Muslim leaders released a statement condemning such violent extremists as false Muslims, fake Muslims, not following the teachings of the Quran. And we too, as people of faith, as Christians, we stand up against violence in the name of God. And on this weekend especially, we're reminded of Martin Luther King Jr. and the importance of standing up and speaking out when injustice happens, just like the young boy Samuel had to do against the house of Eli. It was Martin Luther King Jr. who said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter." And so we need to speak out. He also said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that." And this world, we know, needs that light so desperately. And so today I stand up and say, Je suis chrétien. I am Christian. I am not alone. As millions around the world gather around bread and wine this morning to proclaim the God we believe in. I am Christian, which brings me to our second call story that we heard, and that of the young man Nathaniel. Now, we don't know a lot about Nathaniel from Scripture. He's only mentioned a few times. But we do know that he was originally a skeptic, maybe even a little judgmental with his comment, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" But we also know that face-to-face, one-on-one encounters with Jesus, he comes to a point where he declares Jesus as the Son of God. And we know that he sticks with it because if we read further into John's Gospel, chapter 21, it mentions Nathanael again. He was at the beach with Peter and Thomas and James and John when the resurrected Jesus appeared and offered them a fish fry for breakfast. "Come and have breakfast," the voice says, and the text tells us that no one asked, "Who are you?" For they knew it was the Lord. Calling them away from casting their nets into the sea for fish, and encouraging and empowering them to go forth and spread words of gospel redemption to capture the hearts and minds of men and women. And Nathanael did just that, as it is believed that he became first missionary to India, taking with him manuscripts of Gospel of Matthew and preaching and teaching in that land. Nathanael's call is an example to us of what it is to be touched by the power of God's love and transformed and sent out to share God's light in the darkness of the world around us. Perhaps that's why I love to read these stories of faith in action as a part of the ELCA that are in the pew this month. There on page 10, you would learn about Heart River Lutheran Church in North Dakota, where Pastor Rachel Larson says, "We are an unusual church because half of us are incarcerated." And what she's talking about is that church shares a campus with the North Dakota Youth Correctional Facility. So they minister not only to the community, but also to the young men and women who are incarcerated. And in there is the witness of a young woman named Taylor, incarcerated for selling and using drugs, saying, "This church, Heart River, it's a place where I found myself again. It's a place of hope and new beginnings." And I say thanks be to God for the light of Christ going into the dark places of the world. And I'm mindful of those same types of ministries here at Calvary, like the Angel Tree Ministry, where dozens of people before Christmas, under the leadership of Dave Ellis, went into the community and shared gifts and Bibles and stories of faith with those who have a parent in jail. Or I think of the Thresholds organization and ministry started by one of our members, Dick Bergeson, who have reached hundreds of people by going in and teaching life skills and decision-making, helping to prepare them for a new beginning. Yes, we are Christian, and we need to take the words of Jesus into the dark places of the world around us, much like Nathanael did. Now, in a few minutes, we'll sing the hymn, Here I Am. And I love the phrase, I heard you calling in the night, revealing metaphorically the need for us to go into the darkness of this world and shine with the light of Christ. Tim Howard knows this. Maybe you remember the name Tim Howard, the goalkeeper from the U.S. soccer team on the World Cup, a huge man with a huge wingspan standing in the goalkeeper's position to keep out the soccer balls. And it was the heartbreaking loss to the Belgian team where Tim Howard set a World Cup record with 16 saves and inspired soccer fans around the world, inspiring them with his play. But what's more inspiring for me is his moral grounding and his commitment to faith. As I read about him and learned his story, raised in North Brunswick, New Jersey, by a single mom. His parents divorced when he was 3. His mom had a one-bedroom apartment where she raised Tim and his brother, working in a container company to make ends meet for the family. And as a teenager, diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome. And of course, with that came all the ridicule and the taunts and the put-downs. And yet, with the help of his family and his church, he overcame that and succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. He's quoted as saying, "My Christian faith helped me stay grounded in defeat as well as in victory, to not get too excited about the successes and not too low about the failures. Je suis chrétien, we are Christian. We have an identity that lifts us up when we are down and grounds us in God's gracious love, empowering us to go out and shine with his light." Now you might say, I can't be a World Cup goalie, or I can't be a missionary to India. And I say, you don't have to. I say, bloom where you are planted, Christians. That's what God's Holy Spirit empowers you to do. I agree with Desmond Tutu when he said, social harmony and friendliness and community are some of the greatest goods for humanity. Social harmony, friendliness, community. These are not rocket science. We can do these things. So let your gospel light shine. The final story comes from our preschool. Monthly, the pastors lead chapel with our preschool students. This month I was with the 3-year-olds, telling them about Jesus calling the disciples and the first followers who followed in Jesus' way. Andrew and Simon Peter, James and John. He's talking about how we follow in Jesus' footsteps as well, and how isn't it fun in the summertime in the sand to make footprints in the sand and to follow someone else's footprints. And the day I was leading chapel was the day after we had that snow a few weeks ago. And I said, isn't it fun to see all those footprints out there in the snow? I got an email the next day from one of our parents. She said, Pastor, I just have to tell you, we're out running errands, and our son, Logan, 3-year-old, stops me and says, Mommy, footprints. Jesus is here, and he's following us. And I say, yes, Logan, Jesus is here. Just as the psalmist said, where could I go to escape your spirit? If I go to the highest mountain, you are there. If I go to the depths of the ocean, you are there. Because when Jesus called Nathanael, he gave him not just a purpose, but a promise, saying, "Behold, I will be with you until the end of the age." And that is the promise that I live in and trust every day of my life. God with us. And so I'm happy to join with Tim Howard and Richard and Dave and Rachel Larson and Martin Luther King and Desmond Tutu and countless others who seek to build a world based on understanding and dignity and respect and love. And now to him who is able to accomplish abundantly beyond all we could ask or imagine, to him be glory, now and forever.